Excited to welcome our next guest, someone who has a great understanding of the topics before us this morning, Illinois Congressman Sean Casten. Thanks for being here, Congressman.
Thank you, Ben.
So yeah, let's jump right in with something that's kind of ripped from the headlines this week. The Senate has newly confirmed two more FERC commissioners, David Lacerte and Laura Sweat. You went viral a few years ago by coining the musical term hot FERC summer. So I would love to know what you are expecting and what are your concerns about this new FERC majority, and will the song be Gonna Make You Sweat by CNC Music Factory? Come on, Gen X,
It's amazing how many suggestions I've had for future FERC floor speeches, and that's less off color than most, so maybe. So I don't, I have no knowledge of the particular individuals. I think the challenge for FERC and what I hope the Senate will, and I hope the White House will do, frankly, is that FERC needs to be an independent agency. FERC at its best has been the only part of our energy regulatory apparatus that has found ways to put consumers first in our energy policy. Because putting consumers first means rewarding markets means encouraging competition means scaring the dickens out of politically powerful incumbents. And I will maintain to my dying day, and I hope maybe I do something in my legislative career that changes this, but so far the single most impactful climate policy that has ever passed Washington was FERC Order 888. Because that was the order that said if you generate cheaper power, you can make money by selling cheaper power. And all of a sudden, the gas industry went from simple cycle to combined cycle. The nuclear fleet went from 60% to 90%. CO2 emissions in the US went from 1,300 pounds a megawatt hour to 900 within the span of about 10 years. And a lot of incumbents got really scared because all of a sudden their not fully amortized assets were going away. And I think I'm going to name some names here. Joe Manchin's legacy will be breaking that independence at FERC because he hung the sword of Damocles over Rich Glick. He hung the sword of Damocles over the open spots for a long time. And so you've had FERC that has been afraid to do the things it needs to do to put policy first rather than think about, will this market reform differentially affect this senator or that senator? And FERC can't function that way. So I just hope we get back to an independent FERC that's putting consumers first, because they're an amazingly powerful agency if they are doing what they are authorized to do. And I'm scared a bit because this White House and potentially the Supreme Court seem to be hostile to the idea of independent agencies at all.
Yeah, it's a very live question.
If you really want to screw the American people, politicize FERC.
And market policy, as you pointed out, effectively being climate policy. A discussion about energy security can go in a lot of different directions, but you recently introduced something called the Cheap Energy Act. What would that legislation do?
So it goes back to what we were saying about let's put consumers first. Why don't we put consumers first? And with respect to all the conversations about permitting, has anybody ever heard of a regulated utility that struggled to build a generator in their service territory because they couldn't get the permits on it when they were going to rate base that asset? Has anybody ever heard of a utility that struggled to connect a wire between two nodes it controlled? Has anybody ever sat there and said, boy, this huge ramp up of LNG exports suggests that we have a permitting problem? In all those cases, it's the same permitting rules, right? The difference is that there's no economic conflict between two ends of the wire, two ends of the generator. And what Mike Levin and I have tried to do in our CHEAP Act is say, let's change the rules so that if you as a player in the energy industry can lower the cost of energy for consumers, let's give you a way to make money at that. So, let's use tools that have been sitting there but have been underexploited. FERC has been directed to create performance-based rate making. They haven't done it. Let's use those tools to say if a utility can help decongest a node, how about if that's a way to make them money instead of a way they have to go to their shareholders and say, bummer, we used to sell power at $90, now we can only sell it for $30 because there's a bunch of cheap wind that came in. Consumers love it, but it's bad for the utility. Why have utilities so massively under-deployed smarter transmission technology, smarter transmission policies, gets in the arc, kind of because if they lower the line losses, they have to pass that cost on to their customers and they don't make money at it. Well, let's give them a way to be incentivized to do that. Let's get rid of this conflict of when the 1935 Natural Gas Act says you can't approve an LNG export facility unless it's in the national interest and doesn't define national interest. Let's explicitly say part of the national interest is lowering costs for US energy consumers. These shouldn't be controversial, and yet through our entire history, we have tended to favor producers over consumers every time we've hit that barrier. And so that's, we have a lot of permitting reform pieces in there as well, but our basic theory is if you get the profit incentives right, permitting is easy. If the profit incentives are wrong, permitting is always a fight.
I'm glad you mentioned consumer costs. That's politically very front and center right now. The title of your bill, the Cheap Energy Act, is not subtle. What is going on politically around energy prices, and how do you see that factoring into the midterm elections? I mean, electricity prices are on their way up, gasoline prices pretty modest on their way down. How does that shake out?
I mean, the hell of it is energy prices have to rise a lot before they become politically salient. I think that's sort of always been the reality in the U.S. And so as an energy nerd, I would like nothing better than to campaign on energy. As someone who cares about the constituents I represent, I would like energy prices not to go up so much that that's a salient point. I think it's worth stepping a little bit outside of the United States because we get caught up in our own noise sometimes. There was a report last week that for the first time in history, we added more solar and wind generation in 2024 than we added load worldwide. Total fossil use fell worldwide, total solar and wind rose by more than load. The overwhelming majority of that was in China and India, and the US is going backwards. If anybody is out there saying China and India are just way too woke, you're a dumb, you know what, right? Yeah. In the United States, in the last 15 years, we've seen no increase in demand for oil. We've seen a collapse in demand for coal and a surge in solar, wind, and EVs because they're all cheaper. So markets are winning across the board because given the choice, consumers want cheap. Markets are winning to a much greater degree in parts of the world that don't feel conflicted about whether they should put energy consumers first or energy producers first. And I'm a Democrat, but let me be bipartisan about this in my criticism. 2020, the price of oil collapses, and Donald Trump calls the Saudis and says the price of oil is way too low. We're going to withhold military aid from Saudi Arabia unless you raise the price of oil. The Saudis flinch, the price of oil goes up. There was no American who said, thank goodness, that gasoline was way too cheap when COVID hit, and I feel so sad about our nation's oil refiners. 2022, price of oil is through the roof. A number of us were pushing the Biden administration to say, this tool can be used the other direction, and we couldn't get any traction. Because in both cases,
couldn't get any traction on what's
out of the Biden administration to say use this tool against the Saudis to pressure them to now open the taps and lower, because it worked for when Trump did it. Why don't you do it? And we couldn't get traction because there's always been this tension that says if in a fight between consumers or producers, we're going to push the other way. And I think you can either look back in time and be very depressed and angry about what that's meant for how much Americans are paying for energy, for how much we've contributed to global warming, or you can look forward and be super optimistic about the unbelievable opportunity to have our cake and eat it too.
So if you're one of the more prominent lawmakers in the House on these topics that we've been discussing and other energy and climate topics as well, if Democrats regain control of the House in the midterms, can you share with us what your plans and oversight and legislative priorities will be?
I mean, it's hard to know where to start on that. Donald Trump commits an impeachable act every day, right? And I'm not saying that to be newsworthy. I'm sitting here in Chicago where we're sending federal troops in violation of about 15 different laws and stepping on civilians' rights. We're turning states against each other. There seems to be a deep hostility to, as I said at a hearing yesterday, the party of Lincoln seems to have decided that they hate everything Abraham Lincoln fought for. We got to fix that. On the on the energy side, what Mike and I are hopeful on is that the earlier version of this bill, I think we got to about 80 Democratic sponsors, and let's get that to a point where we can expand it out, and we're having some good success on that, and really get to a point where we can anchor on it, because I know that Hakeem really wants to have an anchor energy and climate policy to come in that takes this seriously. This can't just be let's rejoin Paris again. The world doesn't take us seriously in Paris. Yeah. But we've got a huge opportunity, and the opportunity, I hope, these numbers are so crazy that they seem like they're not true, but trust me, they are. If you look at every country in the OECD and divide their GDP by their primary energy use, that's your energy productivity, right? You can look at stats and look at our labor productivity. You can look at our return on capital. In terms of labor productivity, the United States looks like one of the leading countries in the world. In terms of return on capital, the United States looks like one of the leading countries in the world. On energy productivity, the United States produces a little over $200 of GDP per million BTU of primary energy. 200. The United Kingdom generates 360. The Danes generate over 500. The Swiss generate over 600. We do an unbelievably good job at wasting energy in the United States. Can you imagine what we would be talking about if our labor productivity was half of our competitors or a third of our competitors? So let's unlock that, right? Let's use that to say we could massively grow the U.S. economy with technologies and approaches and regulatory things that our competitors are using. And by the way, if we don't, where are you going to locate your aluminum plant? In the country with cheap energy or the country with expensive energy? Where do you want to build your AI data centers?
Germany's going through this right now. Yeah.
Or expensive energy. Yeah, exactly. Germany's they're making all those, and for some of the same weird states' rights issues, in the way that they work. So, do we do this because it's urgent and we're going to be screwed if we don't, or do we do it because we're extremely hopeful and optimistic and are the country that commits to capitalism and markets? I'll take either door, right? But I think what we hope in the next term is let's really make that a priority and push in that direction, and put consumers and markets first.
And you said that some news there. You said that Leader Jeffries has specifically said that he wants to sort of come out of the gate with a core democratic energy and climate policy, and has he tasked you with helping to be the one that...
Well, I wouldn't say it's anything quite that specific. I can tell you that there is always an agenda when you have a new administration coming in. What are the priorities going to be? I think there's a recognition across the caucus, that I'm always speaking out of term,
sure,
that there needs to be something in there in the energy space. And I would submit that what Mike and I are doing in this holistic look at our energy system that really centers consumers is the place where that has to land.
As our time starts to wind down, I wanted to ask, what is a sleeper topic in the energy and climate space that you feel is not yet getting enough attention and should be? What are we all going to be talking about at this time next year?
Oh, see, now those are two different topics. A sleeper topic isn't getting attention, and something we'll be talking
Fair
about
enough.
next year. Well, maybe just something that I would love to see, and maybe there's some smart people in the audience that can do this. I've never seen a very good answer for what the heck happened to the U.S. energy system between 2008 and 2020. For 100 years prior to 2008, electric load in the country grew basically with GDP. When we had a recession, it came down, then it came back up, but you could more or less predict electric load GDP. 2008 recession hits, electric consumption flatlines and doesn't grow for 15 years, basically. 2022, we come out of COVID, and all of a sudden it starts surging again. And we're telling a story now with a very short, backwards-looking view that says, well, this is about AI.
Yeah.
Or a couple of years ago, this is about electrification of vehicles, or it's about re-onshoring of manufacturing. Maybe those things are true, but I'd love to see a good answer of why did it flatline for 10 years? Because so much of the pressure in the utility space is by contrast to the fact that they didn't really have to build a lot of capital for 10 years.
Yeah.
And in the way our utility model works, if you're not building capital, you're not getting new rate cases filed, and so you don't have upward pressure on rates. And so we have this huge upward pressure on rates now relative to where it was for the last decade. but I don't really have a good answer for what happened. And when I talk to my fellow energy nerds, everybody says, well, we think it's energy efficiency. I'd love to believe that, except that for that to be true, we fell in love with energy efficiency investments in the depths of the COVID recession. Really? I'm not saying that's not true. I would love to see an analysis of that. And if we do get here next year, and somebody said, well, now I know what caused that, then I think we have a better way to say, okay, is this sudden growth a reversion to a 100-year trend that's just some inexorable force of nature, or is this just noise that there's actually a new normal that's more flatlined? I think both of those things are wrong, but I don't know what the right answer is.
No, it's a great question, and I think certainly the it's all AI narrative is way, way, way too simplistic.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Congressman, I think we are out of time, so we'll have to leave it there. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.